Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our third Canadian Cattle Producers Virtual Town Hall. Welcome, everyone. Merci de nous joindre à notre troisième Assemblée publique de l'industrie bovine canadienne et bien.
On a perdu le son.
You've gone on mute, Michelle.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. My name is Michelle McMullen, and I am the Communications Manager at the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Je m'appelle Michelle McMullen et je suis directrice des communications de l'Association canadienne des éleveurs de bovins. Before we begin tonight's event, I'd like to offer a couple of tips to make your viewing experience more pleasant. There are 3 viewing options available to you tonight: active speaker, gallery, and mini. To change the view layout on your screen, please click the View Options button at the top of the Zoom screen. To open tonight's meeting, Bob Lowe, President of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and Michel Dague, Chair of the National Cattle Feeders Association, will provide short remarks. Thank you, and I'll give the floor to Bob and Michel.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our third town hall. I'm Bob Lowe, President of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Many of you are wondering what our reaction to the federal government's announcement was on Tuesday, and while we were disappointed over the amount and the lack of the improvements to the BRM, we do realize that this is an initial investment. And we are very pleased to see that they did include $77.5 million to increase processing capacity. As we all know, the problem here is in the bottleneck at the processors, and we need to get that has to be the #1 focus to get fixed. Where are we going? Well, we need to focus on how we can move forward as an industry. We will continue to work with the federal government, pushing for improvements to our BRM file. At the same time, we're going to align with other like-minded organizations and speak more directly with our customers on the value of ag to the country. I would also like to thank Ministers Bibeau and Minister Dreeshen for working together to move the beef industry forward, as can be seen by Alberta's announcement for help for the industry today. With that, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Yes, thank you, Bob. My name is Michel Dague, Chair of the National Cattle Feeder Association. Like CCA and the rest of the beef industry, we were really disappointed with the federal funding announcement. We have been working closely with the government throughout this pandemic and had hope for more support. For example, the US government, our neighbor, invested 12 times for support to farming sector in US. Remember, it's our competition too. We thank the government of Alberta today for their $17 million for the set-aside program. We recognize these are initial investment and will continue to work on our member behalf, ensuring all sectors get the resources they need. Our supply chain is backed up to the farm gate approximately 100,000 animals. These animals are costing producer approximately $400,000 per day to maintain, while their value fell from $250 million pre-COVID to approximately $165 million currently, based on the Fed cash price. So the set-aside program is a good start to assist. While the industry works to return to full capacity, we give exceptional thanks to the processors and the employees in the packing plant working so hard. Un petit mot en français maintenant, si vous me permettez. Alors, tout comme la CCA et l'ensemble de l'industrie du bœuf, on est très déçus de l'annonce du gouvernement fédéral. On avait travaillé en étroite collaboration avec le gouvernement depuis le début de cette pandémie et on espérait un meilleur support. À titre de comparaison, le gouvernement américain a investi 12 fois plus que le Canada pour venir en aide aux fermiers américains. Alors, merci au gouvernement d'Alberta pour leur annonce d'aujourd'hui d'un investissement de 17 millions pour supporter le programme Set Aside. On reconnaît ces investissements initiaux comme un pas dans la bonne direction afin que nos membres de tous les secteurs obtiennent l'aide dont ils ont tant besoin. Les retards d'abattage retiennent à la ferme environ 100 000 têtes. Les coûts d'entretien des animaux occasionnent des frais d'environ 400 000 $ par jour, pendant que la valeur du marché est passée de 250 millions avant la COVID à environ 165 millions aujourd'hui. Entre-temps, un merci très chaleureux aux propriétaires d'entreprises d'abattage et transformation, ainsi qu'à leurs employés qui travaillent très, très fort pour retourner rapidement vers la pleine capacité. Alors, à vous, Michel.
Thank you, Bob and Michelle, for your remarks. Tonight, we will receive updates from Dennis Laycraft, Executive Vice President of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, Brian Parrott, Senior Analyst and Manager at Canfax, Rick Wright, Executive Administrator at the Livestock Markets Association of Canada, and Jared Gillig, Vice President Operations at Cargill. Following these updates, we will open the floor up to questions from producers. We will limit the duration of this entire presentation to 1 hour. Please submit your Q&A. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your question. Please include your name and province with your question. Please be advised that we will not be taking questions from the chat function. I will now give the floor to Dennis, Brian, Rick, and Jared.
Thanks, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. Just a quick update. We've got a lot of information with some very qualified individuals here to talk about what is going on in the marketplace. We're delighted to have Cargill here with us this evening. We are working very closely with the other processors across the country, monitoring the capacity each day and looking at any way we can work closely with them to ensure that we're getting as much throughput. Pleased to say that in Eastern Canada, we're actually above normal processing levels as we headed through this week. Brian will talk about the level that we've reached there. We are working our way back up in a number of plants in Western Canada. Cargill, and Jared may talk more about this, in High River, I was told today, was working up towards about 50% of capacity. With Lakeside, or with JBS and Brooks, they're sort of around that 1,800 head a day that they're working up, and hoping to get more workers back regularly. Clearly, as you look at the numbers there, there's with all of the testing that's gone on, I think we're going to be able to move forward now from that, and a lot of the media around it, to really focusing in on those operations. And when you see Jared's presentation, you'll see all of the tremendous steps that they've taken to ensure they have a resilient operation there and a very safe workplace for their workers. As was indicated earlier, we had the announcement on Monday, and it was some people have described as underwhelming. We'll describe it as very disappointing. And as we made it clear that we had a comprehensive ask that worked, all the parts came together. That said, we need to move on from that. That's what was announced. So we're now working with the provinces and shifted a lot of our attention to our provincial members and the provinces. And already there was an announcement in Alberta. I know there's discussions tomorrow morning in Saskatchewan, and there are continuing discussions with all of the provinces as we begin to move forward. So we're optimistic that things are going to start moving as far as set-aside programs. The other thing we have seen this week is as some of the markets have settled down and futures have improved, certainly the ability through the Western Livestock Price Insurance has greatly improved to look at insurance options for cattle. So again, that definitely bears looking at as we move forward. One of the things I did want to say, we keep hearing about the 1.6 billion that's available through BRM programs. We're sharing with people. We'll be talking to the Ag Committee tomorrow, but it's unfortunate it's being characterized that way because close between 55 and 60% of the money that flows through that program is through ag insurance, and that's essentially crop insurance and forage insurance. That's not intended for the type of coverage that they're suggesting would help us manage our way through a pandemic like this. So we're continuing to talk to them about getting changes to the ag stability program to remove the reference margin limit, to remove the caps. They're now capped at 3 million, and to increase or actually restore the margin to 85% to where it used to be. So it actually could provide some more useful support to the industry. So those efforts continue. We've had really nonstop meetings since Monday as we've reached out to federal and provincial governments and visiting with our processors as we move forward there. The other thing that we have been doing is meeting with the rest of the farm groups across the country. We're working closely with CFA and the Canadian Pork Council, and of course our beef partners here, but looking at a more active campaign, reaching out to Canadians to talk about the importance of the food industry and take more steps to really increase the communication. And you'll see more of that as we move into the upcoming weeks ahead as we get a lot more proactive on that. We're also visiting closely with our counterparts south of the border. Obviously, the more the North American capacity increases, the better off we all are. So we're continuing to visit regularly with them, monitoring what's happening in the plants, and we're starting to see the Tyson plant in the Tri-City area get back up in operation. And it's really critical. Our path is linked to the ability to get cattle processed. So with that, we've got people who are going to talk about the numbers, but they're just want to emphasize that we're continuing to work as actively as we can to seek both market-based solutions and look for the type of assistance that's needed to help the industry manage their way through this. So Michelle, I'll stop there. Yes, I think it's Brian next.
Yes, Brian, you're up.
All right, thanks. Good evening, everybody. Did have a few slides up, Amy, thanks. Yeah, so I guess I'll just going to briefly give an overview of what we've seen in the market, I guess, over the last couple of months. Obviously, I think everybody's fairly well aware of the pressure we've seen on the markets with the lack of movement to the fed cattle side. You can roll through, Amy, on the first slide. But obviously, fed cattle prices have come under tremendous pressure. It's almost a little bit cautious to put a chart like this up, just given, the fact that, we've got kind of limited price discovery in some ways. Our main buyers are off the market, and, a lot of cattle in a lot of instances aren't even getting priced. Not everybody can sell their cattle, even if they wanted to. So, but I guess it's just to put into perspective of kind of where we're at today and where we've, hopefully we can build from. But, these are large volumes haven't been moving at these prices. So again, we've come down over $500 a head here just in the last 6-7 weeks. And, if you look back, even before this recent fall off, we were probably a couple $100 under market value. So obviously the COVID has hit hardest at the Fed level, as cattle are hard to get to market. Now this is Alberta, I guess on the east side, it's been kind of actually as business as usual. One of the only areas, I guess, that have been able to maintain kill levels. Their cattle, whereas in Western Canada, we were down to about 108 this week live basis. In Ontario, still probably about 142. So they certainly haven't seen any spring price improvement, but their market's been very, very flat for the last several weeks. So again, they're at a premium, but you got to remember too, they're still struggling in terms of losses at these 140s kind of Fed levels. Next slide, on the feeder side, the markets haven't been quite hit as hard. Obviously, we're still, I think a lot of people look at this, that, we can move through this COVID case once we get cattle flowing again. 858 feeders certainly hit some of the lowest prices they've seen in quite some time in the last few years, but seeing a little bit of a bounce back. Obviously talk about a month ago or 2 months ago was the futures kind of were falling apart they priced in a lot of negativity. A lot of this plant closure stuff was priced in. At the time we thought it was a little extreme, but given where we're at today and what we've gone through, maybe the overreaction wasn't as far out of line as what we're dealing with. But as the U.S. packing plants come back on stream, I think the futures have picked up a little bit. Whereas the United States has a lot of cheap feed or expectations for a lot of corn, and that's maybe helping the feeder market to anticipate a little bit of better markets to come. Again, that's the anticipation part on the marketing side. And here in Canada, also the U.S. markets, for quite some time we were at a premium to the U.S., but given the cheaper feed advantage down in the United States, the current U.S. market provides a pretty solid floor for ourselves, and we could see some more feeder cattle go south as well moving forward. Next slide on cow prices, again, like everything else, they had a bit of a bump there. Spring grind demand remains, incredibly strong. Wholesale beef prices, not sure if anybody's kind of followed, but I don't put a lot of weight on them right now because we can't move product and we're shorting the market there. But a lot of strength there. A lot of the cow market did, with the large plants off the cow market, we've dropped to a U.S. floor price. But really, decent demand for these cows. We saw some more uptick this week. And, both maybe some guys speculating on feeding cows and cows going south. So again, there's still, $20 a hundred weight, 20 to 25 at least under maybe where we would want them to be. But they've kind of found some stability as well and seeing a little bit more buying come in. Some of the U.S. cow plants have been more active and have managed through the COVID maybe a little bit better as well. So under pressure, but and cow numbers have been very light. I think people have taken a wait and see approach, which maybe isn't a bad thing either, keeping the cows if you've got the feed supplies. So we'll kind of get into just looking at some of these backlog numbers. Obviously, kill rates have been, struck down significantly. Last week, the last couple of weeks, we've seen the lowest slaughter levels we've seen going through the data back to the early 1970s. So 24,000 head a week in Canada. We haven't seen that really before. And hence the backlog. The cows somewhat going south, some maybe not coming to town. So there is a backlog there, maybe about 20,000 cows, give or take, depending on exports here the last couple of weeks. But the fed cattle in the West, basically the majority of it's in Western Canada. We're looking as of probably the end of this week or tomorrow, I guess you could say, we're probably 125, 130,000 below our slaughter estimates over the last 6 weeks or so. Waiting on when the Western plants were running at about 20% capacity. They killed about 9,000 or under 10,000 head last week, whereas Ontario killed 14,000 head with their slaughter levels. So the other issue is, this week we will see a pickup. We killed about 18,000 in Western Canada. 8 or 9,000 in Western Canada. Maybe we'll get them up to 18, 20,000 head this week, maybe a little bit more, but still, we're still backing up cattle and we're going to back up cattle for a few more months. And if you look at these numbers towards the end of May, depending how these packers come online, we could still be over 150,000 head of just fed cattle backed up by the end of the month. Then the next slide, just to show sort of where these slaughter rates are, as you can see, down 25,000 head. The thing we got to also keep in mind, if we're talking about 150,000 or possibly more of backed up cattle, we came into this year looking at cattle placements last fall in the fourth quarter, and over 150,000 more calves put on feed in the fourth quarter of 2019. Now we've seen a 50,000 head reduction in the first quarter of 2020. But we've probably got about 100,000 more cattle coming to market out of feedlots for the summer market. And that's, I think, where the concern lies in this backlog is when we talk about a set-aside program, this isn't going to go away anytime soon. Just to put in perspective, last summer we killed about 64,000 head a week was the average through the summer. With this 100,000 head of extra placements, coming at the summer market, that'd be about 5,000 head a week. We're looking at, the high 60,000, 69,000 head a week was almost anticipated. And with that, if you look at this total slaughter maximum, we barely could do 70,000 is a big week in Canada, or was pre-COVID. So if we were anticipating doing 69,000 head a week, certainly didn't leave a lot of capacity to work through this backlog of cattle in a real rapid way. So again, this is something that'll probably will weigh on the market for some time. There's outlets. It's not as doom and gloom as that. Cows are going to the United States. Some of these, we could be sending some fed cattle to the States. Their numbers may tighten a little bit. Should tighten sooner than ours, assuming sort of equivalent recovery and packing capacity rates. We could send some more fed cattle south. We're seeing some guys already adjust feeding rations to push cattle into the fourth quarter. So again, we need all these kind of things to help move these cattle back. But in the short term, some of these backlog cattle are going to continue to push other cattle further and further back. That could definitely take us through most of 2020 without some solid export numbers going forward. And that is anticipating that these packing plants can get back to capacity or kill rates that can deal with the sort of what was the natural supply coming into this summer. Placements have been down 20-30%. Dennis touched on the WLPIP. As I said, we've seen feeder cattle prices move forward. The futures have come back the last few days. I think, obviously the demand is still strong. There's all the incentive in the world for these processing plants to get the cattle through processed. So that's a positive if we can get it done. So I think the futures are seeing, as we see these plants come on stream, maybe we know the demand is there. It's getting the cattle through the system. And futures, again, they anticipated some pretty negative prices. They're anticipating a little bit better prices going forward now. And that all feeds into the Western Price Insurance Program. So as I say, this backlog of cattle could still be in the market a factor into the fall. You're looking at for marketing calves. The insurance was about $212, $214 and that covers you through October on a 600-pound steer. So $212, $214, it's the highest it's been in some time. Yeah, it's about $9 a hundredweight to insure that animal. So yeah, you're looking at $50 roughly on a calf, give or take. But you're still insuring over $2 on a 600-pound steer for the October market. And have a look at that. It's going to fluctuate, but by the end of May is when that window right now is when the calf insurance closes. So I think I'll leave it at that for my bit.
Thanks, Brian. Rick, it's your turn for the update. Thanks.
You want me for next, Michelle?
Yes, for sure. Please.
Okay. Well, from the Livestock Markets Association of Canada, we'll bring you a little bit of update as to what's been going on in our world. As Brian alluded to, we saw the cow prices continue to increase despite higher volumes coming to the market. Of course, Brian mentioned the U.S. packers have put the floor price on most of the cows here right now, but we saw a real big uptake from the provincial abattoirs and some of the small plants. They've been strong contenders on the cow markets here, and we've seen pretty strong demand for the younger cows to go back into the breeding programs and some of the greener feeder style cows to go back on feed. So that's taken some out of the kill numbers, and that's helped maintain the price. Just to give you an example, the cull cows in Manitoba, eastern Saskatchewan traded at another 3 to 5 higher this week, with cows going to kill at 81 to 86 cents. And higher prices on the breeder type cows. Alberta was quoting in that 70 to 80 range on the good cows with very light offerings. Now, can we maintain those prices with larger volumes coming to town? Probably not, but we're still a long ways from the 40 to 50, 60 cent cows that we expected when the bigger plants in Western Canada quit killing the cows. Bull demand for the cull bulls, very strong, trading anywhere from $1 to $1.25 right across the West, and lots of demand on those killing bulls. Deliveries to the markets, well, they're down from last year. From Ontario to BC, we sold 42,000 cattle last week, and that's down slightly year to year. But over the past 3 weeks, we've seen receipts go down from 30 to 40%, depending on what part of the country that you were in for the same time period as last year. Electronic sales, however, were fully steady with the numbers with last year. In comparison, we look at the U.S. markets. Receipts going to the auction markets were, anywhere from 100,000 cattle, under the 100,000 cattle for the last 3 weeks, and that's down 50% from where they were a year ago for the last 3 weeks. It just looked like producers were refusing to sell at the current market prices, and once they shorted the supply, that helped to push the market up a little bit. Of course, when Sonny Perdue announced that the slaughter capacity in the U.S. would be back to normal in 10 days, he might have been a little optimistic, but it certainly put a spark into the futures market, and we saw those increase quite a bit. Once again, combined with the short supply, we saw a good $300 to $600 per hundredweight in the U.S. increase on the feeder cattle prices this past week. Part of the big decline of Canadian feeder cattle is the lack of butcher cows coming to the markets, but also the markets are suffering a little bit on the numbers, because normally this time of year, we sell a large number of cow-calf pairs, and with the public gathering restrictions that are on the markets, we can't let the buyers into the markets. We're restricted, depending what part of the country you are, anywhere from 10 people to 20 people. And so the sellers are really reluctant to book in their cow-calf pairs, and of course, with no price discovery at the auction marts for those cow-calf pairs, they're not really sure what they're going to bring. Selling those cow-calf pairs on video lines like they do with the bull sales is quite difficult, because they're usually sold in packages, and guys like to buy their own cow-calf pairs. In most cases, they like to get a real good look at them in the ring. So we've seen very few pairs trading publicly in Western Canada in the past week. On the feeder cattle market, the price volatility on the cattle, especially over 800 pounds, that combined with the hope by industry that there'd be some government assistance to cover those $200 per head losses that we were seeing in the marketplace, resulted in producers holding back deliveries on those cattle. Now, some producers are not prepared to sell at the current discounted rates, and they're hoping they can last until that backlog of market-ready cattle is eliminated. The perception coming from a lot of the producers out in the country is that with the fed cattle being backed up, there's limited room for the feedlots to acquire and bring in fresh inventory, and that's one of the reasons that the market is so under pressure. So they're hoping that they can outlast it. Despite those thoughts, the feeder market was stronger again this week. Demand for the cattle over 850 pounds fairly limited, but there was demand from Eastern Canada for some of those select groups of feeder cattle that with some premiums being paid, especially some of the larger groups. Feedlots there, as you know, are having a tough time moving their fed cattle, but when they do get some pen space, they're quite anxious to replace that inventory. We're seeing a lot of the fleshy heifers, fleshy steers going south. The Americans put the floor price on, and again, that bumped up this week, anywhere from $4 to $6 a hundredweight. So we saw a significant increase on the bottom end of the pricing of the cattle. Producers are keeping some extra heifers home to breed, and there's some very selective demand on purchasing replacement style breeding heifers. Producers have been holding back. They were hoping for some assistance in the Western Livestock Insurance Program from the government. Improvements this week in the future markets have increased the coverage amounts to more attractive levels, but the premiums are still really high, and that's slowing up enrollment. This program is extremely important, especially for the young producers that are getting started in the business and have only been in it for a few years. The marketing sector has been getting a high volume of calls from the primary producers and backgrounders looking for advice on what they think the market is going to do in the fall, and should we be taking this insurance, and is there any help coming down the road? And we've almost become guidance counselors, to our customers, and we don't know. So it's been very difficult to try and guide them through. The anxiety and the frustration levels in the cattle community is the highest that I've seen since BSE, and maybe the highest that I've seen, in the 40 years that I've been in the business. With the increases in the coverage this year, we're encouraging producers to take a look at the coverage through the Western Livestock Insurance Price Premium Plan. It's really the only option that they have, and it doesn't address the needs of our customers in Eastern Canada. They're kind of out in the cold, but we're certainly taking a hard look, especially with the improvements that we've seen. But when we get into those $60 and $70 per head premium, that seems like a lot of money for the amount of coverage we're getting. Now, with that said, today I think in Manitoba we could get up to $2.18, about $9 a hundred on the calves. We were about $1.90 at the 850 weight yearlings coming off the grass, so with about a $8.50 per hundred premium on them. So it's much more attractive than what it was. But we're running out of days, as Brian mentioned, to get everybody signed up on the calf program, and there's going to be some tough decisions to be made. And we really are encouraging CCA and the provincial governments to get together and see if we can make this program a little more affordable for the producers, especially these young guys, because they're our future. And at this time in their careers, they haven't got a lot of equity built up in the cattle industry, and to take a major hit this fall. The concern that a lot of people have is that will the COVID effect and the packer disruptions, the backup of the fed cattle last into the fall run, and what kind of effect will that have on the calves, and will there be a set-aside program for the calves, or something that we can hold them over if we're trying to buy some time. So again, the anxiety level in the country is extremely strong. Going forward over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see numbers decline coming to the marketplace, especially on the feeder cattle. The grass inventory is very, very strong. If it's under 700 pounds, we're seeing prices that were equal to anything pre-COVID-19 and right back into the fall. Those cattle look like they are fairly high risk, so there is some optimism coming forth. And I think from the producer level, we're seeing being indicated to us that with the packing plants in Western Canada getting back, processing some cattle, plants reopening in the U.S., that maybe we've seen some improvement, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel to get back to being normal. But as Brian mentioned, there's also the concern as to how long this is going to last in Canada before we get it cleaned up. So going forward, next couple of weeks, we expect to see steady to strong markets. I think the cow market has probably peaked unless the exchange moves in our favor. But certainly, we had an instance here in Manitoba. We had 200 cows at a market on this week, and the cows stayed steady. We thought that might break it because of the local demand, but our U.S. buyers tell us that there's no restrictions on the number of loads that they'll take on the Canadian cows like they have done when the volume's big, so it's kept the floor price pretty well. So with that, I'll wrap up our report, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thanks, Rick. We'll now pass the floor to Jared.
Yeah, Michelle, I want to check my audio to make sure I had to switch over to my phone. I kept getting kicked off.
Your audio is great, Jared.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So first off, appreciate the opportunity to represent Cargill with everybody this evening. We truly do appreciate and recognize the work of our Canadian cattle producers who work similar to our employees to provide essential services across the, as we're providing protein onto the tables of families across Canada and more importantly across the world as we look at our exports. So today or this evening, we'll give you an opportunity to hear a little bit about what we're doing in High River specifically, and share some of the measures we're taking throughout our plants, both in High River and Guelph, and to keep our industry strong. So first off with High River, the next slide will actually, kind of go through what that looks like. So obviously we had to take the position to take that facility down for a period of time. And, as Cargill looks at why, for years, Cargill has truly built themselves on the health of our employees, the safety of our employees, and safety truly does remain that top priority. If we can't do so and operate our facility safely, then we're not going to do that. And what we found ourselves in a position of was because of the employees, as they were either being quarantined or were out dealing with the COVID illness, we came to where we had some of our essential jobs that we just couldn't fill, and could not continue to produce safely, not only in a human safe manner, but also in a food safe manner. So we made the tough decision, and I know tough on everybody on the call, to idle our facility for a period of time while our team got healthy, and we were able to take some additional steps. I am proud to say, working with AHS, OHS, and CFIA, we were able to bring the plant back up on Monday, and we actually did so beating our expectations. and really proud of what the team's doing, and just continue to be proud of the work and the effort of the team there in the plant. We continue to get more folks coming back in as they come back, healthier. I think we all see, or a lot of us see, the daily reports from the AHS, and it's definitely great to see those numbers and the number of recoveries coming back, and truly do recognize the team for that. So on the 6th, then we were able to bring our fabrication shift back up, and also similarly to what we saw with the harvest floor, we're able to bring it up with quite a bit of strength. We did spend quite a bit of time training folks and really walking through. We basically, if you think of social distancing and what we've got to do, we've got to basically retrain some folks that have been in there for 25 years on what they can do, and how we just got to go about this a little bit different to make sure we keep them safe. Again, most employees are eligible that reported back to work, which we're very happy to see. We're at about approximately 50% capacity of where we're at, and we're going to continue to ramp up that production. Obviously we've got to do that with the lens of employee safety. I mean, our harvest floor employees were out of the plant for 21 days, and our fab employees there just right at 14 days. So very important that we ramp that back in, and so recognize the acceleration back may not be as quick as probably all of us on this phone call want to make it, but again, that lens towards the safety of our employee and with our team there is absolutely critical. As we think about Guelph, and I didn't have a call out there for Guelph, but got obviously representation across all of Canada here. So as we think of Guelph and the facility that we got in Guelph, they continue to run extremely strong, quite frankly above production levels of what our history would be, and that team continues to do really, really well. We think of the case ready plants that are going into the retail business, and those plants are operating over capacity too. Those teams have done a remarkable job working to fill the demand and keeping meals on the plates for all of Canada there. So just want to make sure we recognize those teams as well. This slide here, we start talking about the preventative measures in the facility. So we've spent quite a bit of time with CFIA in the facilities. Obviously, when we're thinking of OHS or OHS, whether it be in Alberta or Ontario, and then the local public health authorities, specifically AHS there, as we've went down and come back up, but also working closely with that team in Ontario too, walking them through the plant. We had a call this week with the leadership there in Ontario, and feel very good about the position we've got and what we're doing for that team. So some of those things, obviously, you can see there, we've pulled off to where we're not allowing any unnecessary visitors. And this goes all the way back to late February, where we started seeing, hey, let's make sure we don't create additional exposure. We've started active screening. So we initially started that with questions, and then we moved the week of the 23rd of March. We actually moved that to where we've got screening of temperatures, and doing that through infrared cameras. And then if folks do get temped out on the infrared camera, they go into secondary screening, where we've got medical staff that's actually doing an evaluation of them and helping make sure they understand, what they need to do if they do end up getting quarantined, and then going through that and making sure they're isolated correctly. So spending a lot of time on just the education around COVID-19. I mean, if you pay attention to the news, you'd think, you get it, it's going to be the end of everything. But, again, we see there is the majority of people will recover fine. Some obviously have a little bit more struggle, and, so the more we can do around education, that's what we've definitely found to be beneficial. Talking about additional PPE with the masks and face shields, obviously doing mandatory masks. As you all recognize, that's been an evolution too, right? There wasn't that many weeks ago where it was actually suggested that we don't wear masks. So as you think there in the late March, and then obviously went into masks, and today they're mandatory across all our facilities that you'll see. The face shields, or we've also got permanent barriers in place. Obviously these facilities work where folks are close together. I mean, we've all seen that, and I've got a slide I'll show you here in a second that I'll show you some of those pictures. The other thing around social distancing and barriers, obviously, as we think about staggering breaks, we've got, there's 500 folks on the fabrication floor. And as you think about going into the cafeteria in a normal time, I mean, that's fine. But in today's time, we can't have that entire group. So we actually stagger breaks to help relieve the congestion in these areas. And then, trying to make sure we're watching the employee traffic, keeping segregation that way. And then the additional sanitation, we've increased all of our sanitation since the 1st of March there in the welfare areas. And then also we're doing fogging over the weekends, and we do an additional cleaning through the nights as well, specifically in those welfare areas. Obviously, being in a processing facility, we're fortunate in the fact that we've got a very robust sanitation process that happens every night out in the production areas. So this, as I talk about that additional sanitation, that's in those welfare or the commons areas, not in our production areas, that we continue to do every day from a food safety standpoint. We talked a bit about signage and communication. Obviously with the languages spoken in specifically in High River and Guelph, that creates some opportunity. So it's definitely something we spend a lot of focus on and make sure that the communication is correct with our team members. The next slide is going to show, I believe, yep, this is actually in Guelph, where we've got the segregation. So it shows how we've put plastic barriers between our employees. And basically that helps to make sure that, from a conversation standpoint, they're just not in constant contact with the folks next to them to help with that social distancing. The next slide actually shows our cafeteria in High River, Alberta, and shows how we've done segregation within the cafeteria there. So basically created cubicles, and rather than a mass setting where you've got folks all sitting there chatting, you've got more cubicle style set up at that point in time. The next slide talks about some of the things we've done, as we continue to learn and continue to develop. One of the things that came out, specifically with High River, and we've taken this across all our facilities in North America, is just that focus on carpooling and looking, the exposure that was inadvertently created with that, because you've got folks from multiple households coming together in one car, and oftentimes you'll get 4 to 6 folks, depending on the size of the vehicle, coming together. So we're actually limiting access to where we've got no more than 2 folks in cars. And then we've also, specifically in High River, we worked with the bus company and we've retrofitted several buses. I think we've got 5 buses set up this way that actually have plexiglass set up between the seats. And then we've got dividers between the seats as well as you're walking up and down the aisles. I talked a little bit about working with the local health authorities. Really proud of the work that's been done there, not only from the suggestions of, hey, let's look at this, but the amount of time they've spent, coming in and helping to educate our teams. We had, Dr. Hinshaw and her team, we were on a webinar with the team. They've done multiple town halls and really looking at areas where we can continue that education with the team. We've talked about installing installing barriers. So we've looked at additional barriers, we're just trying to think what else and where else. And you think of the bathrooms, you think of, locker rooms are obviously another point. So we've reassigned locker rooms to create space and utilizing the time that people come in and out of the locker rooms. So, on the harvest floor, it takes about 45 minutes from the first person out there to the last person. So utilizing that space and with the lockers to truly spread out that, so you don't have all those folks in one area at one time. And that helps immensely, specifically in that locker room area. And then the other thing, as I mentioned, is just continue around education and awareness with social distancing, both inside and outside of work. And, obviously we've got the folks with us for 8 hours. We can spend a lot of time on that, but it's very important that they also understand what they can do outside of work. And so, continuing to think of different ways to talk about it and make sure we've got the education. Again, that's where AHS has really come through, and also working, with the team there in Ontario as well. So that's what I've got right now, Michelle. And then I think we're opening up to questions.
Thanks so much, Jared, for your update. Before we open the floor to questions, the following industry representatives are also available to take your questions. We have Fawn Jackson, Director of Government and International Relations at CCA, as well as Michael Young, president of Canada Beef, available to answer your questions. We also have CCA staff helping to respond to questions by text. We would ask that you include your name and your province with your questions. We will now be taking questions. Please type your question using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. Our first question for this evening is from Dan, and it's for Bob. That initial investment in the processing bottleneck, is that a short-term fix to the current situation, or will this provide any long-term value for producers?
No, Dan, it's to increase capacity. So that would be a long-term, it would be a long-term project.
Thanks, Bob.
Perhaps I can just add in some more there.
Sure thing,
federal
Fawn.
announcement was for $77.5 million, and it's not specifically for meat. It's for a number of agriculture, food processing, but certainly in our discussions, we know that there is interest in supporting that increase of processing capacity, and also to support some of the changes that need to be made because of COVID-19. So we've had some good discussions on that front. So as was mentioned earlier, I think, we all recognize that that's where a crux comes from. So it was good to see the federal government invest in that.
Thanks, Bob and Fawn. Our next question is from Leonard in Alberta. It is good to see the feds getting support with a view to the long term. What is being done for the cow-calf producer with the past experience from the earlier BSE outbreak? The set-aside program helped the feedlot to avert disaster, but the calf producer got nothing, and it took years to recoup.
Not sure, Bob or Dennis, did you want me to tackle that? And then
Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll chip in as well.
Sure. So certainly our ask of the federal and working with the provinces has been a number of different approaches. Our three immediate asks were around the set-aside program, were around livestock price insurance, and then also changes to the advanced payment program, similar that had happened for canola last year. And then those were our immediate asks, but then there were certainly other longer term asks around the business risk management, for example, with agri stability. So I think, that was one of our focuses, is that this wasn't a choose your own, which one of these tools we want to go with. It was that we need that comprehensive approach. And so after the federal government announcement, you would have heard CCA come out and say, that's one step that we needed, and thank you for that step, but there are other steps that need to be completed, and we're going to continue to push both at the federal government as well as working with our provincial members to make sure it's understood how all of those programs work in conjunction with one another. Also with the set-aside program, and Dennis, please feel free to jump in because you certainly know have more experience with that than I do, but it's I think we're hoping that there's going to be some flexibility, or we've recommended that there's flexibility built into that with an advisory committee that is able to identify what part of the supply chain might need some specific management. So that's how we're approaching that.
Yeah, and Fawn, I'll add a few comments. And there are different circumstances across Canada affecting the cow-calf. Obviously, in Western Canada, there is access to the Western Livestock Price Insurance. We've been working very closely with the Maritime provinces to get an index established down there, so they have access to price insurance, and we're getting quite close, I think, to getting that done. How do you look at some of the business risk management programs and actually make them useful to cattle producers? And for cow-calf producers, we're told getting rid of the reference margin limit is a really important factor. Getting the coverage restored to 85% would also make a big difference to that. Conversely, for feedlots, in most cases, getting rid of the $3 million cap, that's a very significant factor there. And as we've worked with Ontario in particular, there's they have chosen to go with the risk management program. We've been supporting their efforts to try and get that addressed. We're continuing now with our new members, our Quebec beef producers that are back looking at options with them as well. And when you get to the set aside, one of the things we made certain in our recommendations is that the cow-calf sector is strongly represented on that group. And as well, what's different this time from, the BSE, we had, at that time, the largest herd in 30 years. Right now, we've got the smallest cow herd in 30 years. So some of the options we might need to look at, we really require looking at that through the lens of a cow-calf producer and how we might consider solutions there. So it is going to factor. And one of the great things about our board of directors is we have everybody from the seed stocks sector, cow-calf backgrounders, and feedlot operators on it. So we end up having a pretty strong discussion about how we make sure every one of these things are being considered properly.
Thanks, Dennis and Fawn. Our next question is from Riley. Would someone comment on the disparity between fed cattle prices and the cutout value? Packer margins are reported as 650 plus USD per head south of the border. What do we do about the margins in Western Canada?
Maybe I'll start on that one. I think the first thing that we're experiencing is that right now while you can see the cutout values that Brian was talking about in the lower calf prices, we're probably seeing some of the most extraordinary costs that processors have seen in terms of the number of employees who aren't at work and are being, they're still being compensated, all of the investments that they're making in the plant. So I'm not sure at this stage, there's that either of the large plants would feel there's any significant margin being made. Now that said, when things get back to normal, we are having discussions with the plants about that issue, and we're going to have a look at that and have a very active discussion about price discovery and where we move with this. So, right now, I think the critical thing is to get all of the investments made that are necessary so the plants can get up and operating at full capacity, and then hopefully we'll start to see with the U.S. plants recovering that we do get some stronger competitive bidding going on live animals. But Bob, I don't know whether you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Just that before we start talking about excess profits, we should bear in mind that the most important thing here is to get the plants running at full capacity. Without that, excess profits mean nothing if you can't sell anything.
Yeah, I can actually chime in. This is Jared from Cargill. As you think about it, and Dennis, appreciate your thoughts on the labor. I mean, we've got, in order to maintain a workforce, we're offering 80 hours COVID pay, right? So if somebody's out of work, we want to make sure that, they're not in a position where they've got to leave and go find another job. We really want to focus on that. So, I mean, the amount of expenses we've got around labor, obviously having to idle that facility, that is an enormous asset to sit there and to be idled. And then the additional costs, one example of the additional costs we're seeing, obviously you saw the barriers, and, those aren't temporary. I mean, those are, we've made significant investments bringing folks in to pay for that. But it's even the masks, and this is something that a lot of our, even within Cargill folks don't recognize, but we're spending $2,000 a day on masks that we weren't, that long ago, right? So it's things like that we've got to figure out what the sustainability of it is. So, and clearly, as you start looking at the math equation, somebody's got to start understanding what the true cost actually is.
Thanks, Jared. Our next question is for you. It's from Ryan. How close are the U.S. Cargill plants to running at capacity? What is the estimated maximum capacity at High River with COVID restrictions in place?
Yeah, it's an absolutely great question, and something that you know, we had an opportunity to talk to the CCA here. It was either last week or the week before, and you know, provide an update and talk about what everything's going on, obviously with the focus on High River and the position we had to take there. But as you look across North America, we have had, and we are in different positions all across North America. If you think of our plant in Freona, Texas, we've got some reduction down there, but nothing, you know, it's just, there's more delay for, say, in what's hitting that area. You know, our Fresno, California, and again, as I mentioned, our Guelph and like our Wyalusing plants, you know, those plants continue to run very, very strong, and they're at capacity or slightly above capacity. And then we've got other facilities where, you know, whether it be Dodge City, Kansas, or Fort Warren, Colorado, where we are running about a half capacity, similar to what we're seeing in High River today. And then, you know, Schuyler, Nebraska is another facility. I'm sure you've read the news where we have had to bring that one down and idle. Again, focused on very similar what we've said from an employee standpoint. When we can't do it safely and human safe or food safe, you know, we're just not going to do it. It's the number one asset we have truly are the folks that walk in that plant every day, and just an honor them with that. So from a capacity standpoint, post-COVID, you know, obviously that's why, you know, as we think of the barriers and we think of the face shields, you know, we do aspirationally believe we can figure out how to get pretty normal of where we were, you know, above that 4,000 head mark. It's going to take some time to get there, though. You know, I talked about rotating shifts. You know, all of this is brand new. So as we ramp in, it is our hope and intention, and we believe we can do it. We've proven it in some other facilities where we can, you know, maintain. You may not be right at that level, but we'll be very, very, very close to that is what we do anticipate.
Thanks, Jared. Our next question comes from Rob. Since the closing of the federally inspecting Riding Regency plant through COVID, including the last agricultural industry meeting, it seems like BFO is leading the charge for beef producers. They have been prepared with information ready to answer questions. It is CCA's responsibility to be accountable to all producers across the country. $125 million from the feds to be split between beef and pork producers is a disappointing and an inadequate amount. How is CCA planning on changing their actions in order to improve results, or are they returning all remitted checkoff dollars from the last 2 years?
Did you say that was directed to me, Michelle?
Bob, I don't know if you or Dennis would like to
Okay.
take that question.
Maybe I'll start and Dennis can fill in the blanks. You heard Dennis describe what our asks were, and what we ask. I mean, we don't have the key to the door. We can get in the door, but we can't necessarily. We don't get to do exactly what we want to do. We try our best to get there, and our asks were national in scope, and we push as hard as we can push, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Dennis, you want to?
Yeah, I think obviously, you know, we are constantly evolving the way, you know, candidly, I will say, I think we've really compared, when I've talked to other groups, have all mentioned how much we are communicating as an industry and with our national strategy, how we're all working together. You know, this has been a joint effort with all of the groups, and we're going to continue to do that. And, you know, I know as Jared just mentioned, we've been visiting on different occasions. You know, when it comes to the processing capacity, we've had our team talk to every single processor that's federally inspected of, you know, that small to large size across the country, looking at how we can address capacity issues moving forward. And I'm very pleased, you know, I have a tremendous working relationship with the Beef Farmers of Ontario and all of our provincial members. And, you know, I know there's frustration out there, but, I will say, I'm incredibly proud of the team that we have working in the CCA. They have been working tirelessly on all kinds of issues over these years, trying to, whether it's transportation regulations, whether it's looking at other regulatory impacts like getting the negligible risk application in. All of those things are being worked on very actively. I'm actually very proud of the work that the team I get to represent, the work that they've done for the industry. And I know it's not an easy time right now, but we're going to continue working on this and try and make sure with our partners who are on here tonight that we do get results for the industry.
Thanks, Bob and Dennis. Our next question is from Jeff, and it's for Brian. You say that producers can't sell fats cattle. How do you account for the large amount of cattle that are reported traded for delivery well out into the summer?
Hi, Jeff. Usually if they're too far out, basically they'd be categorized as a contract. Certainly right now, it's pretty tough to distinguish between the spot price and a further out price. Generally in normal markets, even quite often in Canada, we're 2 to 4 weeks out from our spot bids to when these cattle actually get processed. So, but there's also times even in quasi-regular situations where we're out 6 weeks. But usually, we can establish them like this week, and we establish pretty close to what a spot market is in that 2 to 4 weeks, or if it's a few more weeks, or I guess another week or two out, that becomes our spot price. And basically anything that's going to be an outlier from that price that has a deferred delivery then doesn't go into our cash price settlement, or into our cash price weighted average, or into the settlement index with AFSC. I should also specify that I think this week we did have sufficient, from some of the smaller plants, we have enough volume and transactions that we should have, or AFSC should have a fed cattle price index to put out this week. So I meant to mention that. So hopefully that answers your question, Jeff.
Thanks, Brian. This next question from Clint is also from you, and this is our last question. Brian, today there was $1.10 up to $1.15 US bid on fat cattle, which equates to $1.54 to $1.61 Canadian. Do you think that we can realistically expect the fat price to rise from there in the next 4 to 5 weeks as we work through the fed cattle supply? I'm hearing increased demand from packers as they move forward, with some trepidation that the demand will remain and their bid will climb as kill picks up and chain speed increases. Your thoughts?
Yeah, good question, Clint. Got to be a little bit careful. As I kind of mentioned in my price chart, these markets are not really deep or a lot of liquidity there. There was some 110, 115 trade, but I don't know how much, if a lot of volume can really trade at that value. I think packers are trying to work with some of the feedlots, especially in the United States. I think they're being monitored a little bit in terms of that price spread between fed cattle and cutouts. But again, I don't think that's full price discovery on all of the cattle. There was cattle trading at 95 cents today too. It's hard to say how we react. In terms of the actual question, realistically expect us to get there, as I work through these backlog numbers, and quite frankly, I think through the month of May, in my opinion, we're going to continue to backlog cattle. It's going to slow down, but I don't think we're going to actually start chewing into this backlog for some time. So, certainly this was supposed to be our prime time. Those market bids were we were expecting more than that at this time, but everything's changed now with COVID. So realistically, I think once the plants come on, as you hint, I would expect prices to improve, and they could improve quite a lot. Whether you can, I think 160 or those are kind of out of the range right now, unless these plants can turn it around in a heartbeat, and I'm not so sure they will. So I think I'm certainly seeing we'll see some stronger prices, but I think the highs, our old high in January was in the low 160s, and I think those are kind of behind us at this point. So we'll see some price improvement, but even 150 range is probably pushing it. And once we head into the summer market, we're just kind of running out of time to hit these peak prices for the spring market at this time, unfortunately.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions this evening. Before we close tonight's meeting, I'd like to open the floor to Bob and Michelle for closing remarks.
Sure, Michelle. We know that the producers are frustrated and perhaps more than frustrated, and it's pretty tough on all of us. But the best thing that you can do would be write to your MLA or your MP, both preferably, explaining your frustrations. We actually there's a template letter on our website that you can download and send it in. This has got to come through the politicians, I think. I'd like to reiterate that WLPIP for those in Western Canada is a pretty good level right now, and that sure the premium's high, but you should really check out, you've heard from Brian, you've heard from everybody here that this probably isn't over quick. I would suggest people take advantage of that. Branding season is upon us, and we actually have a COVID-19 approved procedures is what I call them on our website. So we encourage you to have a look at that and follow the advice there. And I'd like to express our sincere thanks to the workers in the processing plants. They are absolutely critical to the success of Canada's food supply chain. I'd like to thank the meat packing companies who are continuing their investment into safety and innovation to ensure that their employees are safe and able to keep supplying beef to the customers. I'd like to give another thanks to our industry partners, McDonald's being a good one. We've all heard that they have had to quit sourcing all of their supply from quit sourcing a little bit of their supply from Canadian beef and are bringing it in from elsewhere. And this is a factor of we just can't supply it to them because of the packing issues. They've assured us they will come back to 100% Canadian beef as soon as we have the beef to give to them. My own opinion of that is I'm just really glad they're still selling a lot of hamburgers. And finally, and most importantly, to the consumers who have shown throughout BSE, is the first time I witnessed it, but their devotion to Canadian beef and to the Canadian industry. And we really want to thank them for following us. There may be a few shortages, but if shortages won't last for long, and we will come out on top. We're going to beat this thing, and just have faith in the system. It will work. So I'll turn it over to you, Michelle.
Yes, thanks, Bob. I agree with you with the special thanks to McDonald's Canada sourcing 100% of its beef, but temporarily now for foreign supply. They will go back as soon as we can deliver meat to this company. At the end, be patient, positive, and resilient. Frustration at that time is not an option for me. As workers recover from illness, we will continue to deliver more safe food to our valuable consumer, and going back as soon as possible to normal is the best way to recover quickly market share for my side. En français, soyons patients, restons positifs et confiants. Alors, pendant que les travailleurs d'usine vont récupérer de la maladie, on va continuer d'offrir des aliments de la meilleure qualité possible à nos consommateurs. Un retour le plus rapide possible à la normalité reste la meilleure façon de récupérer nos parts de marché. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight's town hall. There will be a short survey when you exit tonight's meeting. We would ask that you complete the survey to provide us with important feedback for future virtual town hall meetings. If you have any follow-up questions, please email me at mcmullinm@cattle.ca. Thank you and stay healthy. Merci et prenez soin de vous.